Ola Oladele, the Vice President, Global Markets at Parthian Partners, joins us now to discuss this story. Ola, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today. So I was chatting to a guest about this point yesterday. Unfortunately, we couldn't take it further, but I'd like to hear your perspective about the dilemma of the government now that they've committed to, if you like, kick the can down the road and continue to pay the subsidies.
So it really is a dilemma because it's a social problem. It's not just an economic problem, it's a social problem. So with the subsidy situation, oil prices have hit $90, over $90 currently, but we are not producing locally, we are importing fuel. So we have to manage the poverty level locally, we have to manage inflationary pressures, and so the government has to push the can forward. Now, how do they plan to fund it? From the Minister of Finance statement, there is some deficit from obligation from NNPC that the NNPC is owing the federal government some money. So the first plan is to finish up the reconciliation and figure out how much they can offset of the 3 trillion from that. And then whatever is outstanding will be borrowed. Now, the borrowing plan is already a pressure point because our debt to revenue ratio is already at 70%. And so the question is, how much more borrowing can we accommodate as a nation? And aren't there other solutions as against borrowing? But given the short time and the pressure, the short-term option for the government is to borrow. It's almost like their hands are tied in this situation.
And the IMF obviously has pointed out the dilemma, the impact of that high debt payments compared to revenues. It's really a problem. And the big question is why the government isn't perhaps looking at other options such as privatizing some government-owned enterprises, concessioning, to just, if only to raise a little more cash, but potentially even bring in a lot more efficiency into those institutions. Why do you think that's the case?
So I think it's almost a point where you're under pressure and so you're just thinking of the short-term thing to do. I think that's one, because some of these options actually bring in revenue. They're like if you think of the telecom situation and how that sector was opened up and we are getting taxes and all that and jobs are being created. So I think it's more like a near-term, short-term fire brigade approach. I also do think that as it becomes more obvious that this path is unsustainable, we will be forced to make some of those changes because it's almost like a low-brain activity at this point to take that option. I think that by the time we review and see how much NNPC can bring to the table and reduce the 3 trillion deficit or 3 trillion additional deficits, when it's obvious that it's not that significant, I think other options would come to the table and will be more inclined or more open to adopting those.
Right. But let's talk about the implications of this. So if they do move on to borrow, as you mentioned, as has been stated, how does that really change things? One, in terms of assessing the balance sheet of the government moving forward, because the thing about borrowing is that you have to pay back, and that obviously impacts spending moving forward. But beyond that, of course, it could impact the financial markets in terms of interest rates as well.
So in terms of borrowing locally, last year was a proof that even when the debt management office comes with a high supply, they have found a way to manage interest rates going higher in the markets, right? So on a local perspective, I do think that we have managed ourselves so far. And as long as there's liquidity from FAC allocations and things like that, then we will be able to borrow successfully locally. However, there's the foreign exchange pressure and the fact that globally interest rates are going up. It will be very tough for us to borrow consistently externally and not cross into the double digits interest rates, which will be very, very punitive, which will be a major impact both on our balance sheet as a nation and then on our FX, and have impact on the FX reserves also. So it's a tight position that we are in, which is why I do think that at some point, giving out a license to do something, selling a license and getting people to bid will become an option, because we need to actually open up some industries and let the economy pick up.